Welcome to the Evolving Leadership Development Podcast. Each episode brings you fresh perspectives from thinkers and practitioners who are redefining leadership in the age of AI.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Evolving Leadership Development Podcast. I am your host, Panos Malakoudis, and today I have a special guest. Today I have with me Jordan Rodger. So let me read the introduction because it's really interesting. So Jordan is a behavioral scientist. He's going to tell us a lot more about this. So he's been trained as a behavioral scientist, and he's currently leading the innovation and intelligence team at Ezra. Ezra is a global digital coaching provider. Jordan, he has spent the last 15 years working with some of the world's biggest organizations. Some of them I've worked as well. And he's created science-backed interventions that drive positive impact and measurable change, all very important things, and we will talk about them. Very interestingly, he sits at the Responsible AI Committee for the Adecco Group. Remember that, Responsible AI Committee, this is important. And much of his current work focuses on the skills and behaviors it takes to lead in an AI-enabled organization and how to build those skills and those behaviors. So welcome to the podcast, Jordan.
Thank you for having me in this wonderful studio, very flattering lighting.
I know.
I'm enjoying it.
We are beautiful people.
And great company as well.
Well, Jordan, behavioral scientist. Now, I'm coming from learning and development as well, and we have a lot of instructional designers in learning and development. You don't see a behavioral scientist that often in those teams. So tell us a little bit, what does a behavioral scientist do in the context of leadership development, learning and development?
Sure. We're maybe a rare but growing breed. Well, maybe just to tell my story a little bit. You said very well in your intro, sort of working with organizations to create positive change. The way I did that in the past was as a psychologist and an instructional designer. I have other sort of hats I've wore in the past too, but I was in a role a few years ago, and I was sort of reaching that point, where you're sort of waiting to get promoted, and you sort of feel you're going to sit there for a while. And I was looking for a course to study. People like me and you, and maybe others listening, when you decide to do extra study on top of your day job, and I found a brand new course at 𝐭𝐡𝐢𝐬 called MSc Behavior Change. And I looked at the prospectus, and it was one of those light bulb moments where I was like, this ties together everything I've done in my past. I've worked a little bit in international development. I was a CBT therapist for a while, and then I've worked in L&D in organizations. And I was like, what we're all trying to do here is change behavior. That's what we're trying to do. And in lots of other fields as well, sales, advertising, it's just, we're all trying to change behavior. And what behavioral scientists do, and what that course taught me, was there are so many validated, tried and tested models, theories, systematic ways of creating interventions to change behavior. And it's all there, and I just didn't know about it. And then, straight away, I remember going back to our office and sending some of this to the president of our company at the time. I was like, we need to start using this stuff in what we do. We were doing soft skills development for other organizations in workshops. And the next day he put an hour in my diary, and he was like, we need to find a way to bring these insights, these tools, these models to organizations, because they're all in this game too. We're all trying to change behavior in whatever form it might be.
We are. And we were recently discussing, Jordan, and you were telling me the link with CBT, with cognitive behavioral therapy. And you were telling me, I wrote it down, that 10% rule. That is really fascinating. I want us to discuss a little bit more, because you were saying that, people, they might be happy with what we've been historically providing, training, courses and stuff like that, but is it actually working? What is the evidence? And you were using that analogy of CBT, and I thought that was a really interesting fact.
Yeah. So it's funny how you think back to your career moments, but this was another moment for me. I left the corporate world for a while, and I was like, I want to help real, salt of the earth people with their problems. So I decided to be trained to be a therapist. I was working with people, common mental health disorders, anxiety, depression. And through the study, they told us, 60% of people who have cognitive behavioral therapy recover. So, we measure them at one point, we measure them again, and they seem to have improved. They don't have as many symptoms. And that sounds great, right? Until I learned about what they call the waiting list effect, which is that 50% of people recover on their own. So it's the waiting list effect because in the National Health Service, there are waiting lists. And so you'd say, yeah, you need some cognitive behavioral therapy, but we can't fit you in, for a couple of months. You go back to them and they'd say, actually, I feel better now. So what really struck me there was, and so many analogies with things like coaching as well, is like it improves it by 10% more than doing nothing. And then what really interests me is, of that 10%, what is it about the therapy that explains that variance, the 10% difference? Is it just somebody admitting that they've got a problem? Is it like being listened to intently for 45 minutes a week? Like, what is it that the person is doing? What is it about that environment that's helping them make quite drastic, significant change? But how do we explain that 10%? And that's a sort of approach I've taken into the working world, into now coaching with Ezra, is like, what can we do to create that difference from doing something, not doing anything at all, doing something that's okay, or actually doing something that's great and really creates that measurable impact? So yeah, that's what I get excited about and keeps me busy.
Key word there is measurable.
Mm-hmm.
And I love the waiting list. What do you call it? The waiting list?
The waiting list effect.
Waiting list effect.
Yeah.
A couple of months ago, I was interviewing a professor, 𝐯𝐢𝐻𝐬, who's done a lot of work around change and coaching. And he was telling us, I think it was a recording for the ICF Greece. And he was saying that, of course, people love coaching.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it's not working, people love to have somebody just listen to them.
Mm.
So if we only measure, do people like it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Are we really measuring what matters? Are we really measuring that it works?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the answer was not necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
So only measuring, did you like your coach? Did it work for you? Did you appreciate the intervention from the doctor or from the CBT? That's not necessarily enough. Just the sentiment is not necessarily enough. In the same way that we're measuring, many organizations only measure the net promoter score.
Yeah. The hero statistic, right?
Exactly. It's the easy way out. I was speaking with a leader recently, and I said, what kind of surveys do you have in your company? When it comes to, are people happy with their manager? And they told me that the survey question in the employee survey, like the quarterly employee survey, was, would you recommend your manager to someone else? And I was thinking, oh my God, that's a net promoter score for people, for managers. So I thought that was a terrible idea.
It's a very good way of reducing things down, right? But at the same time, if that's what you're measured on, you're going to be a great friend to your team member, aren't you? You're going to change, what measures matters. But yeah, I mean, working in the L&D space, the amount of times we do evaluation surveys and people, what was the, what did you enjoy about it? Or, did you, and people go, oh, it's just great to kind of understand that people are sharing challenges.
Yeah,
and,
good guy, Jordan.
I spent so much time on that program. So, then you really want to get into those different layers of evaluation. And, the gold standard for us and what we at Ezra work with organizations. We say, we'll go as far as you want to go. If you want to work out $1 return on this, there are certain caveats with that. We have to take it with a pinch of salt, but certainly, did you change behavior? What examples are there? Have other people seen you change behavior? And then, with organizational data, we can start to point out those real significant dollar returns as well.
The elusive ROI.
That's it. Yeah, I almost didn't want to say the acronym there.
Tell me now, Jordan, and that's the interesting bit. What is the behavioral science adding on top of the traditional learning and development Kirkpatrick model? So what is it that you're bringing as a behavioral scientist in the design of those programs? And if you have some examples to share with us, what is that evidence-based approach that is evolving from behavioral science?
Yeah, great question. Lots of avenues I could go down here, but I think the balance you strike as a behavioral scientist, right, is if you've worked, you have lots of experience in the learning and development space, you know what works, right? You have a good idea of what works, but you can't always necessarily explain why it works or how it works, or to the 10% point, what works the most, what has the most effect. So I joked, and I said this recently and someone laughed, and I was like, no, really, like half of what behavioral scientists do is they're able to put theories, models, tools, frameworks behind what we're already doing to kind of not just make it sound fancier, but to actually say, this is why it's working. These are the term I like is the active ingredients, the active ingredients that are creating change. As I said, the 𝐭𝐡𝐢𝐬 model is the one I was trained in at University College London, and the one we use at Ezra, which is that to change behavior, you need capability, you need to be able to do it, you need the opportunity, it needs to present itself, it needs to be easy for you to do, and others need to support you, and you need the motivation. So you need to rationally want to be able to do it, and it needs to kind of feel somewhat good, or at least not feel bad. And so, we can do it retrospectively, looking back. How does this work? One of the first pieces of work I did at Ezra actually was why coaching works. Like, what is the behavioral science of coaching? What is it that makes it so effective? But then prospectively, when you're innovating or you're just continuously improving an intervention, behavioral sciences is a seat at the table. You're working with product managers, coaching experts, whatever. It's very interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, the approach. And when it's like, what should the subject line of that email reminder be? How often should we be sending them? How long should sessions be? We can bring in a view based on the research. So just bring in that evidence-based view in a nutshell is what we aspire to do, and make it pragmatic, right? Because we know that the research might say one thing and it'd be very, very thorough and it spent years to go through, but we work in a busy, fast-moving world, and we need to find that balance as well of using the research but making it work in the context it needs to.
Yeah, you don't want it to be academic, purely academic. So there's a method to the madness. I always use the analogy of a duck calmly just floating on a lake. It feels, it looks calm, it looks serene, but underneath it's working really hard, right? So all that beauty, all that loveliness, what is happening underneath? There's a lot of theory, there's a lot of methodologies.
The individual, the organization even, doesn't need to know what's happening underneath, as long as it feels good and it drives them to change behavior. That's the goal.
If we did a good work, they wouldn't. It all looks lovely. So then AI comes into play, right? And AI amplifies, exacerbates everything. It creates a lot of emotions. It creates a lot of different and unique reactions in organizations. So how's that influencing the work that you do?
Great question, and ever topical. I think we've all been on an individual journey with AI. I think, as people, as practitioners, as employees, as organizations, and it feels. I often wonder if this is, what happened when they introduced video, TVs instead of just radio, and everyone freaked out. Or, when you hear about train travel for the first time and people thought their heads were going to explode. Because you do sort of question yourself sometimes, are we getting too wrapped up in this? But, I think there's been the skepticism of, we hear this is going to totally revolutionize the way we work, and we're going to have AI bosses and all that kind of stuff, through the people starting to experiment with it. Organizations starting to experiment with it. And then, I think there's also a bit of a moment we've all had. I've had it, I'm sure you have too, when you think, there is no future for any of us because this stuff is really, really good, right down to it, it fails on you and you shout at it. I try to be polite to my AI. So I think we've seen all of those things, but the really interesting, what was just a research question for a long time, was what happens when AI becomes part of the team. And I found that hard to visualize, right? You can't help but visualize a sort of cyborg sitting in your office, right? And so it felt like sci-fi fantasy for me, I think, for a long time. And then we had one of the biggest companies in the world. I won't name them, but they are very invested in AI. They've made all the hires, and they have sort of bringing it into all their processes. And they posed this question to us, like, how does leadership change when AI becomes part of the team? And it was no longer a sci-fi; it was happening, right? And that was the question they posed to us, and we started to formulate a response. And without getting caught up in a hype, we do believe it is going to change what it means to operate at all layers of an organization. And for leaders, I think, which I know you're interested in on this podcast, leadership, right? I think it really, really fundamentally changes what it means to be a leader. And I can go into that if that's useful. But one of the things I think is very relevant is, like, if you think about your identity as a leader, like, what do you pride yourself on? Years of experience and lots of knowledge is part of it, right? And I see this in people who join organizations, who join Ezra straight from uni, and I think back to when I was in those days, and you'd get a brief and you'd go away and you'd try and fail, and you'd ask someone for help, and someone would chip you along, and you'd finally get there, right? But through lots of trial and error. I feel like I can give a brief to somebody new to the workforce now, and within an hour they can have volumes and volumes of, like, really good content, thoughts, ideas, like potential ways forward. And as a leader, I think that's great in one sense, but very intimidating in another. You're no longer necessarily the expert. You've got people who could go off and do the work of 10, 20 people on their own. And I as a leader myself have had those moments where I'm like, how do you keep control of all of this? Like, how do you keep a measure on it? How do I stay accountable for what my team members are doing when they're using AI? So I think it's scary to a leader, I think, and there are helpful ways we can respond to that, and unhelpful ways being the humans we are, and how we're known to behave not always so rationally.
Are the competencies changing, or are they simply, like the leadership competencies, are they changing as a result of AI, or is the focus, or which ones are coming to the surface as most important change as a result of AI when it comes to what leaders need to develop?
Yeah, it's a really good question. One we're actively pondering now at Ezra in our research and conversations with clients. How I like to think of it is they are often the same behaviors, the same competencies, the same coachable things, but they might present differently in AI-enabled world. So our research right now points towards, I call them maybe sort of meta competencies, and we're doing the work to really find out what sits underneath these things. But the ones, if I reel them off, they're things you'll recognize, right? Things like curiosity, or we might think of like learning agility in that sense. But again, what does that mean in an AI-enabled world? Another one we call discernment, which is a fancy, quite cool way of saying good decision making, right? Good judgment. We have connection. When AI promises to do all this maybe lower level administrative or even the higher level creative work, how do we make sure that gets shared across teams and doesn't just stay with individuals and their AI? What do we do with this extra time we've been promised, right? That AI is going to save us. We should be using that to connect with each other and work around the AI. And then I think back to where I went initially. One, we're still sort of feeling out, but it certainly resonates with me, is this idea of humility, being, having humility as a leader, which can cover anything from, self-awareness, like it's that sort of, again, that identity shift, and I'm not necessarily the expert anymore, or my role isn't to be the expert anymore, or to mark everybody's, or be involved in everybody's work. So I think together for us, they start to form this picture of the things that are going to be most important as we look forward to leading in an AI world, and what's going to separate a good leader from a great leader.
And these are still proper human competencies, right? We're not reinventing the wheel here. And I keep arguing about that we don't have to invent something else. Perhaps the focus changes, or how the context sometimes changes? Because I'm looking at my notes and I'm reminded of this report from, I think it was from MIT back in the summer, that said that 95% of all AI pilots fail in organizations. And it was a plethora of different reasons why AI pilots fail. One of them was the existence of shadow IT. In what sense? In the sense that because of trust issues, people preferred to use their own AI, ChatGPT, whatever it was, instead of the one offered for free by their company. So I'm wondering now, when this is the new reality, where somebody said, if you already had trust issues in your organization, you're not going to fix them with AI. AI is going to amplify them. It's going to bring them more to the surface. What is then the mindset shift that needs to happen with leaders where they go from something to something else? So you already mentioned you are no longer the expert. I hit the microphone. You are no longer the expert. You need to be more of a generalist when it comes to leadership, or you need to support your people. When you have an entire team that might be suffering from what we call the FOBO, fear of becoming obsolete, what do leaders now need to do differently? What do they need to shift towards to better support their teams as well in this evolution?
Yeah, I like a bit of FOBO. Also use fear of being outpaced, I think is another one as well. We think about, as I was saying, the speed at which it can operate and how that feels to be in the midst of that and leading through that. But I think with the 95% fail, it's the classic. It's not going to be new to anybody listening, but we invest in the technology and not so much in the people, in the mindsets and behaviors that people need to work effectively with the technology. And to an earlier point on measurement, we chase adoption metrics. Adoption it's an indicator, are people using it, but we don't know how they're using it, right? And that's really interesting to drill into. And it reminds me of some work we did with a large tech organization. It was an organization who were, building these technologies and selling these technologies. And we, Ezra, we built what we call a Ezra focus program. So this is a shorter form of coaching. It was something we built with evidence-based principles, as is good practice. But it's three sessions of coaching in between to sort of bolster the journey. We put in what we call behavioral nudges, so best practice prompts and tips throughout to sort of just stimulate their thinking, get them to think and maybe try things differently, and ultimately enrich the conversations they have with their coaches. So does coaching help people, adopt AI better or use AI in better ways? That was the research question, and we found it did. It helped improve. It helped increase usage, and it actually helped people use it in more sophisticated ways. That's what they were telling us. So we wanted to find out why. We weren't just happy finding it. We wanted to find out why. And so we carried out interviews, and lots of themes emerged from the interviews. Some of the ones that were really stuck out to me, and in the only interviews I carried out, were the sort of coaching intervention, just marking a point in time where we know how fast these things move, how fast technology moves, and we can feel we're going to be outpaced, obsolete, that we're behind. But people were just like, they were like, you know what? I sell this product, but I don't think I'm that good at it. We talked in a previous conversation about this comparison. Everyone's working with the AI, and they're not always explaining how they're doing it, and so people have this sort of fear. And what they really appreciated was the chance to kind of step off that treadmill for a second and talk to a coach and admit. They were like, I don't think I'm that good, but I can't say that because I work for this organization. I can't admit that. And they did. And even those that were more confident with it were just saying, it helped me realize that I've just been using it in haphazard sort of quick ways instead of really strategically thinking about how I'm going to use this technology. And then more how I'm going to role model use of this technology, how I'm going to share what I'm doing with my team to that point of connection. How can we make sure that my gains from AI become our gains from AI, and we're talking as a team about how to make the most of it within the confines of our organization. So yeah, I think that's a mindset shift, right? It's like get on board with AI, but also think about how you're doing it intentionally, deliberately, and I think giving people to a point of being listened to, a safe space to like open up and say how they really feel about it and how they're doing, is kind of sacred at this time. It's a really important thing. I know you'll have lots of experience too, coaching people on this topic.
I do find it fascinating, and I find it fascinating that we're talking about an organization, because I know who we're talking about, that is leading in AI. We're not talking about a consumer. We're talking about people that are designing, architecting the solutions. And what is really special about AI, and it's really interesting how coaching contributes here, is that it's not just a cognitive task. It's not about, passing a certification, doing a course, learning. There's an inherent ambiguity in the use of the AI. It's not, here's the course, learn how to use it, you're ready. It's, here's AI. We're not really sure what is the best way to use it, but we'd like people to start using it. So there's a very interesting area there where you say, I understand the technology, I sell the technology, I design the technology. What is the best way? What is the perfect or the better way of actually using it? I don't even know what that is. And then coaching comes in and says, okay, I know everything is running 1,000 miles per hour. Let's slow down a little bit, even for 3 45-minute sessions. Let's slow down a little bit and reflect. What does better look like in my situation? I remember I was having a conversation with somebody, semi-coaching. It wasn't exactly coaching. And they were imagining a completely different career for them as a result of AI. It wasn't necessarily about how can AI make me better at my day job. It was, wow, this is a humongous opportunity for me to even pivot completely. So what as Richard Boyga says it, the optimum future looks like, this is where coaching comes in. It's not about teaching you or reinforcing the learning of a training, of a course. It's more around, what do you need to change in your mindset, or what do you need to reframe to see all the opportunities? Because many companies might not know exactly. Many companies are expecting people to figure it out. And I think it's fair, actually.
Yeah. Particularly with careers, but it reminds me of, I mentioned one of the four differentiators, as we call them, at Ezra, of leading in an AI world. One of them is curiosity. And, we all have an idea of what curiosity is, right? And probably a good idea. But we talk about levels of curiosity. And, with AI use, this is how I started. I imagine lots of people will be similar. How can it make me better at this thing I've got to do now? This thing I've got to turn around in an hour and have no time for. And you do it, and it does it. And you're great. And you have these like head explode moments where you're like, this is brilliant. If you keep doing that, one task at a time, you're not using AI optimally. And it's, again, like, how can it help me in my job? How can it help me find a new career? Is a deeper question to ask. So we talk about that surface curiosity. We talk about that sort of so task curiosity, we might call it. And then there's another layer below that, which is like, how am I going to change my ways of working, my ways of operating, our team's ways of working, knowing that AI can help with these kind of tasks? So sort of taking a step back. And then the deeper level of curiosity, which I think you're getting at, is the like, what does this mean for me? How do I create most value in this world? I think it's probably good for all of us to have a career plan B at this moment as we see how it changes. But, that's what the great leaders are doing. They are thinking, what does leadership mean now? That it can change how we do tasks. It can change how we set up work. How can I add the most value? So that curiosity is the starting point for all of this, I think. And, it certainly helps you get over that fear as well, just actually getting stuck in.
the picture of Socrates comes to my mind every time you talk about curiosity. But also, I'm superimposing now the evidence-based. And as we're coming to a close, we were having recently a conversation, because evidence-based is so important to me, about, okay, the great theory. How do, you have a company coming in, you have a leadership team coming in and says, well, I want to understand a little bit more about the status of this company or the leadership of this company. And you were telling me that you're building something, there's some diagnostic. You want to tell me a little bit more about that? I don't know a lot.
Yeah. So the AI diagnostic, we, go to the evidence when with that question we were asked, how does it change? It spurred all of this work, and there's a white paper on this topic we can hopefully share a link to for anyone who's interested. But this we call it leading with intelligence, and those 4 human differentiators: connection, discernment, which is about making great decisions. I was reading something just this morning actually on how AI affects our system 1 and 2, like our very fast system 1 in intuitive thinking, and our slow rational thinking, because I try to talk to my AI in a rational, slow way, almost like slow it down, as you said, and it fires something off immediately. So, people blindly trust that. We know that. People will pass that off as their own work, and they won't necessarily check it.
Because it's an answer machine. It's designed to provide an answer to the question.
So discernment is about putting a pause to that and knowing where you step in. Humility, you mentioned as well, that's sort of what it means to be a leader. It changes that fundamentally, and how you need to operate, not being the expert or having all the answers. And then connection. So these were ideas that were born from the research. We've looked at how they fit with other models out there. And then what we want to do now is validate that. So we're actively in a research process now where we're validating those constructs. We're thinking about the competencies that sit underneath them, so that by the summer, all being well, we will have a evidence-based, psychometrically valid diagnostic, which any organization could use to measure where their people are now, and then where they are after coaching on, as I hope is clear, these things are being very coachable behaviors. They're all behaviors. They all exist in a current form, but we want to focus on them in an AI-enabled world and help people build confidence, build competence. So at that time too, when we measure them again, hopefully we see some positive change, and hopefully, maybe, dare I say, ROI eventually too.
And you said, it's stuck in my head, psychometrically verified proof, because I have seen online so many models and frameworks that it's just people coming up with random things. Here's how you can measure this, and here's how you measure that, because it takes time to do it properly, right? You don't sit with your ChatGPT or your Gemini and you say, build me a framework. It takes time, and it takes samples, and thousands of samples to validate that model, that it actually works, going back to kind of the evidence-based, not just imagination or creativity, but really hard scientific evidence, and that takes time. So Jordan, where can people find you, and where can people find more about all the great stuff that you share with us today?
Sure. Yeah, you can follow me on LinkedIn. We'll leave a link below, but just one part of an amazing team at Ezra. So I'd encourage, if you're interested in AI, coaching, leadership, that intersection, follow us on LinkedIn. We have a great newsletter full of these great snippets, Ezra Zest. We have our Ezra Asks podcast, which you can subscribe to too. Panos, you're going to be on that very podcast very soon.
I am going to be.
So if people want more of you, they can find it there too. But yeah, do get in touch. We'd love to connect with anybody out there.
Yeah, more of me. I'm pretty sure people are getting tired of me. But Jordan, thank you so much for joining me today. We wanted to do this for quite some time, so I'm really happy that we got to do it.
Yeah,
we cover a lot of things. We could have spent, I have a timer flashing that we're out of time. Thank you so much, Jordan. And thank you to everyone for joining us today and for all the engagement on LinkedIn and on social media. See you on the next one.
Thank you.